Hello and welcome to Inside Intelligence, brought to you by the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program and the Johns Hopkins University Office of Advanced Academic Programs. Today's event features James Acuna discussing the Ukraine conflict 1 year later. My name is Peter Huggins and I'm the event producer. Please note today's program will be recorded and uploaded to the AAP YouTube channel under the MS in Intelligence Analysis playlist. During the program, if you have any questions, please feel free to use the Q&A function, and we will answer as many questions as possible during the Q&A portion of the event. With that, I will turn over the event to our moderator, Michael Ard, Program Director and Senior Lecturer for the Master of Science in Intelligence Analysis program.
Thank you very much, Peter. Welcome everyone to Inside Intelligence. Happy to have with us today James Acuna, who has nearly 3 decades of experience in intelligence operations in both the public and private sector, including 20 years as an operations officer with the Central Intelligence Agency. Based in Tallinn, James Acuna is founder of Frontier Vectors, a US and European-based security and business consultancy for Eastern European startups and American VCs. He's also going to be offering us a course in human intelligence operations for the fall of 2023. Thank you very much for being with us today, James. We're very anxious to get your impressions of the Ukraine war 1 year later, but especially how the role intelligence has played in the war, how the war maybe is transforming our understanding of what intelligence can do, and what the impact is likely to be perhaps on formal intelligence organizations. So I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks for moderating this event. What you mentioned that I'm based in Eastern Europe. Right now I'm talking to you from Austria, which has a different sort of geopolitical opinion of what's going on in Ukraine as we speak. But because of the time I've spent in Eastern Europe over the last 20 years, and within the sort of former Soviet sphere and Russian sphere of influence, Ukraine really presents an interesting existential threat to everyone. And so I think just based on that fact by itself, the biggest land war in Europe since World War II, the consequences of not getting it right really define it. First of all, it defines like this is we feel from a Western point of view that Ukraine cannot lose this war. And so what do we need to do to ensure that happens, right? And so your lead in here was, what I used to do and what the US intelligence as well as Western intelligence agencies do, right, is they collect intelligence. And what you're seeing in Ukraine within the public sphere is the willingness of NATO, the willingness of United Kingdom, the willingness of the United States to share that information with Ukraine. It's been documented. It's been absolutely critical to the success you see on the battlefield, right? But I always told this story too, and maybe I can tell the story here to help define what this other particular int or intelligence also does to the war in Ukraine, which is February 24th, 2022. My son is a big advocate of social media, and maybe I have some of the same apps he does, but I was watching particularly two different channels, and one was it was a border guard outpost between Russia and Ukraine, and the Ukrainians had a sole camera positioned on the border guard soldier that was just sitting on the border there. And then there was another very enterprising channel by a former MQ-9 pilot, so the Predator, the unmanned aerial vehicles. And he was doing live commentary about when the war may start. And based on watching those two channels sort of simultaneously, I noticed that the border guard commander ran away very hurriedly. And then this MQ-9 was running out of Ukrainian airspace at a high rate of speed. In literally 1 hour, the war had started, right? And so what that is this world of open source intelligence, or OSINT. And it has really defined what is happening in Ukraine, how it's used, how it's being collected. We were talking before the show about the cottage industry that it's created, and the ability to really dynamically change what is going on in Ukraine, what is going on and how they are using this. And so it's Ukraine is this wonderful melting pot of the potential to use traditional intelligence and supplement that with open source intelligence to really redefine what a 21st century battle may look like going in the future, right? And so Ukraine is, the biggest land war in Europe since World War II. But can you imagine in other theaters in East Asia, any other conflicts that may come up, and perhaps maybe even in, say, a Transnistria conflict in Moldova, right? Or Russia's willingness or intention to sort of step on NATO, right? And so these are real tools that can be used not only to shape public perception in terms of getting the news out there and getting people on board to support this, but really what the governments, what the militaries can do to fight aggressors like Russia in this case. So that is sort of this is a wonderful opportunity to see all that working together at one time. And sort of the topic of this, it's like 1 year later, right? 1 year later, it's just become more institutionalized. It is being used to fight the battles today in Ukraine, in Eastern Ukraine, Luhansk, Donetsk, Dnipro, wherever, right? It is being used to redefine who wins and who loses these types of wars, not special military operations, but actual wars.
Before the war started, we gave a lot of, I think there was a lot of respect for Russian information operations. And what has this war done to change our perspective on that?
Well, I think what you're referring to is Russia's ability to launch active measures, right?
Right. Yes.
Traditionally, Russia loves to call it active measures. Some people after, say, the elections in the early 2010s leading to the 2016 election, right? The ability to create fake news, right? That can be said of Russia as well. It was proven during the Mueller report and some other things that they actively do this, right? But to the West, what is like, oh my gosh, we can't believe that Russia's doing something like this, is ingrained in their blood since at least 1917, when they had no legal representation in the West. So sort of traditional Soviet intelligence methods were to use illegals, which are intelligence officers that are not based in an embassy, say. And so as sort of a partnership to that, Russia realized very early on that they could alter perceptions by using what is referred to as active measures, right? Writing fake articles, tipping, creating conflicts like they did, I believe it was in Sweden a couple weeks ago, where they funded some right-wing party to burn the Quran or whatever that was, right? And some really good European investigative reported really found out that it was Russia behind this, right? And so really what they're doing is the same thing they've been doing over and over and over again for the last 106 years, right? But the difference, Michael, the difference in this case is it's like telling bad jokes to my brother, right? He's heard them 1,000 times and he gets the punchline, right, already. So he can sort of cut you off at the pass. But people forget Ukraine was the second biggest country in the Soviet Union, right, behind Russia. That they know these tricks, right? They've seen this. They're a daughter service what the Ukrainian SBU, which is their intelligence service, their internal intelligence service, right, knows the tricks, has been dealing with the Russians since 1991, and moreover since 2014, during the first sort of Crimea invasion into Ukraine. And so they know this. And so if these are going to succeed from the Russian side, they're going to have to bring it up a couple notches because Ukraine knows what's going on. And I guess the rest of the world too has learned, like, hey, wait a second, we need to delve deeper into whatever I've heard on social media, whatever I've seen on the media, to see if this really is based on reality in multiple independent sources, or this is just something made up.
And one point that you had made earlier was the speed at which this is flowing is something perhaps new, but it also, which makes a challenge to counter it.
It does. And so there's a really interesting debate today about open source intelligence and whether it's good for conflicts like this or whether it's bad. And the reason that people think it may be bad for these things is the veracity of the information, right? So anybody, I'm not making commentary on TikTok, but anybody can start an account, anybody can parrot news, anybody can do these things. And so, if that MQ9 feed that I spoke about a few minutes ago, if it was an illicit actor and he was doing that, then there's a lot of disinformation being put out there on social media. And so how do you determine the credibility of these different pieces of information, right? And it goes back to the sources, right? So in traditional media, you would have two independent sources. You would say, whether it's Fox or CNN or whoever, like, there is a trust factor based in here. With social media, with OSINT, where is that trust factor, right? It is being developed. It's not like it's zero. But, the MQ9 again, the guy used to fly them and he's Googleable, right? And he has a lot of followers. And so he's built up the Veracity case. And again, though, if he said, hey, it looks like the Russian invasion, February 24th, 2022 has started, but all the other indicators suggested otherwise, he would have egg on his face. But so happenstance that all the indicators at the same time suggested something was happening right now, right? And so you're able to piece those together, which has also created another cottage industry, which is data visualization and the ability to sensitize all these different independent pieces of information to put together a realistic story.
And then we're seeing that in the US. I mean, the Institute for the Study of War, I think, relies on this very heavily to give their basically daily updates of what has been going on the fronts, very detailed. I think this is happening also in other US think tanks. There's a greater reliance on this to give us an understanding of what's going on, although it doesn't move as, sometimes the differences on the ground don't move as fast as you might think.
But again, it's the speed, right? And so if you're fighting an active conflict like Ukraine is fighting in Ukraine, speed is everything, right? And so speed and veracity. Can I get information quickly, and is that information good, right? That I can act on it, I can move troops, I can come up with policy, things like that. And, traditional intelligence sharing, say with the West and in Ukraine, well, obviously it's not a secret, it would be very slow, right? It would take some time. And I'm not sure the US or any other Western intelligence agency is going to say, well, you know what, we're just going to go with that whole TikTok model. And so I think you're seeing the tenets or the foundations of something that could work well together in the future, right? But really, whatever that product is going to be, or those series of products, it has to be taken into account at the pace of these things that they go, right? So people forget, right? A year in, right? You have this elongated conflict in Ukraine, but wasn't the intel of the day was like, this is a 3-day operation, right? This is a special military operation. It's only going to take a week, right, will look in part because of this OSINT and because of the ability to publicize OSINT, that you sort of lined up the defense very quickly with hundreds of nations or 100 nations going and saying, wait a second, we don't like what's going on. We're putting a stop to this. We're doing resources. We're starting NGOs. We're taking care of the refugees, whatever that may be, right? Traditional intelligence does not move that fast. And so OSINT did serve its purpose early on into the war.
Everybody, just make sure that you know that we'll be taking questions from the audience shortly. You can put your questions in the chat or the Q&A function. And one, getting back to this, what's interesting to me, James, is have the Ukrainians been more adaptable to this, maybe perhaps by necessity, than the Russians have? I mean, they've come really, they're rooted really in the same intelligence culture, but at least from appearances, it looks like the Iranians have been quicker adapters to what the new open source intelligence realm looks like.
Necessity is the mother of invention, right?
Right.
And so I think you met Ukrainians too. You said Iranians, but
I said Ukrainians.
Yeah.
Okay.
Some people make that mistake, but like,
Right.
if you're fighting for your homeland, right, are you really going to go through all the sort of traditional ways of military doctrine and things like that, or are you going to utilize every resource that is at your disposal, right? I am sure, right, that prior to last year, there was probably not a lot of doctrine on the use of NATO equipment or TOW missiles or Javelin missiles, right? But they were adaptable. They figured it out. And you remember the whole MiG-29 story too. In the beginning of the war, well, Ukrainians need these old Soviet era jets. But now the discussion is come 180, where it's like, hey, what about F-18s or F-16s, things like that, right? And so this integration with the West a year later has just been absolute. First of all, it's happened a lot faster than I would have ever imagined. But second of all, it seems seamless. It seems like it's moving at a pace that you just wouldn't imagine a year ago, right? Ukrainian bureaucracy, it's a former Soviet state. It's too big, it's corruption, etc. But they've done a pretty good job.
And with a wide variety of weapon systems too. I mean, it's not just not just ours.
No, absolutely.
Yeah.
So NATO, European weapon systems, Turkish, the famous drones, right? But a great story, right? It's like the Ukrainian military's use of commercial, and when I mean commercial, I mean hobby drones, right? And what they were able to do was say, I'm not promoting Mavic DJI, but if there's a lot in the Ukrainian theater, to say, well, it has a camera and it flies, right? Well, I bet you I could see Russian positions using this Mavic. Mavic costs $2,700, right? And we can get maybe 100 of these. Let's give it a shot, right? And so a year ago, the Ukrainians started with that, and just look at all the technology and look at all the things that have been happening, even with UAS or drone systems. In the battle in Ukraine. It's truly amazing. And those are all intelligence collectors, Michael. All those things that fly, all those things, they're collecting intelligence. It's not a secret. They have a camera on it. They can take pictures of the ground. They know what's going on.
Well, the challenge then, of course, is to analyze it. How do you process all this information that they're getting? I mean, do they have the capability to do that?
Well, and thus, the commercial world has stepped up with data visualization, right? And so 2023 data visualization systems, they basically, think of it think about it, if I could take, they call it API, but like if I could take a Twitter feed and I could take an Instagram feed and I could take Contact, which is a Russian social media site, and I could take other streams of information and put it all together and form a battlefield picture visually, What would that get me as a battlefield commander? And I can tell you, because of what you mentioned, that I do work in Eastern Europe, what they're doing with that is revolutionary. It is revolutionary how a commander can see the battlefield. And this is it's changed so much in 365 days.
We should also have more insight too from this on basically what kind of morale the opposing forces have based on social media, even though in the general publics in both countries. Do we have a good sense of this?
Absolutely. And without giving away some trade secrets of some of these companies, absolutely. They're able to take, like, Ukraine is a fairly large battlefield, but they're able to take, say, a particular area, and they look at all the social media and maybe some proprietary feeds, and they can do exactly what you were just saying, right? They can evaluate the MWR, right? The readiness of those particular people. They can evaluate the chain of command. They can evaluate whether the soldiers are writing home on social media saying, we need rations, or we have no sleeping bags. And you've seen some of those, some of the media reports in Russia, about bringing your own sleeping bag. The data visualizers out there are doing the same thing. They are looking at all that little stuff, and there's this, there's this wonderful thing in 2023, which is, akin to like Chat GPT or something like this, where if you put an AI bot on top of all that, then the AI bot is predicting the future, right? So you're looking at the past, you're trying to realize what, say, this group of people did. You're putting some, machine learning or AI on there, and then you're trying to predict the future. To me, that's a game changer.
Okay, I'm going to get to audience questions here in a minute, but just last thing so how do you think, what's been our intelligence scorecard on this war so far? Do you have a sense of that? I mean, there's been a mixed message in the press on how the intelligence community did before the war and during.
I mean, it's public
how are
record.
historians going to look at this?
Yeah, I think public record, what the U.S. intelligence and other intelligence organizations did prior to the war. I mean, there are public warnings, right? There are things that that were said to say, hey, Ukraine, you got to take this seriously. This is really going to happen. And again, I believe that the pre-war scorecard was fair. It's fairly high, right? The ability to predict, the ability to do that stuff. My concern right now, Michael, is just hubris, right? It's not even like U.S. intelligence hubris. It's like, don't get too satisfied of where you are, right? Because it changes, everything changes. And so where are we today? I think we understand, whether that's OSINT or traditional signals intelligence, human intelligence, geographical intelligence, geospatial intelligence, excuse me. I think we have a pretty good guess of what's going on, but never, ever for a second take your foot off the accelerator to think like, hey, now we got it. We can just stop. We can stop innovating. We can just not think of stuff. And, last week I was in Abu Dhabi looking at new military technologies and, what they're doing in space, right? With open source imagery and electronics intelligence and synthetic aperture radars will again redefine what's going on, whether that's the Black Sea or the North Sea or East China Sea, right? It doesn't matter. And so I would hope, I'm retired, right? I would hope that the US and other Western intelligence agencies look at what went right, what went wrong, and try to integrate this sort of open source into, they have open source, but like a better understanding of open source into the products that they can deliver.
And while we're on that, let's get to some questions, because I think this segues pretty well into what you were just saying. So Andrea asked, do you see OSINT as a supplementary tool, or do you think it should be an entirely new government division or INT, or I should say institution, just like, say, NSA?
It's a good question. If you create a separate stovepipe structure, right? So the best thing about open source intelligence is the guy that did the MQ9 video didn't then give it to his boss, who had 10 other bosses that were afraid of their promotions, right? And so then as it went up into so like whether it's OSINT or HUMINT or SIGINT, right? These are raw intelligence feeds, right? So some analyst somewhere has to put all this stuff together and then share it with policymakers who make policy, right? And so if you had this separate organization or an integrated organization, I would wonder what the ground rules would have to be to fully capitalize on the benefits of OSINT in that regard, right? Because I would just feel like it gets watered down. And so maybe it's completely AI, right? And the AI spitting stuff out that then helps the analyst look at other sources of information and say, okay, the AI has a score here, we have a score here, how does that link up? And so maybe it's just a tool that you give to traditional analysts that they're just, you know, hey, have you thought about this, right? Have you thought about what the little AI bot looking at Instagram and Twitter and all these other things is saying, and do you take that into account on a more fundamental level? Because I would imagine they're doing that somewhat today.
Well, and I just wanted to follow up with that because, I mean, this story on intelligence and the war has been largely this open source story, right? But clearly there's been key moments in this when we've seen where clandestine gathered intelligence has played a role.
Absolutely.
Before the war, when now that it's out in the open that, you know, we did intervene with the Russians on this, that we knew their plans. And this was while the country was busy still going, you know, maybe are they going to do it or not? We didn't know, right? And also lately with the Chinese. So,
right. And so like I would say when you see public statements, official public statements from US intelligence organizations, including CIA, right? Warning countries not to do this. Well, if your whole job in life is human intelligence, which is that CIA, you better be pretty confident in your assessment before you go public. And so there's the traditional role, right? I don't know what the agency has or what it doesn't, but that's the traditional role, right? And so it is deterring, it is using it for policy, it is using it to educate, right? These are the traditional roles. And so absolutely does it have a role in shaping the conflict or the future conflict.
Right, let me get to another question here. So any sense then, you're in Austria right now, traditional neutral, any sense there on how the country is viewing the war? Cody asks this.
So I'm only temporarily in Austria, you know, I think if you wanted to understand how countries in the European Union look at the war in Ukraine, just look at the minimum NATO investments, right, and their guarantees within the next 10 years. And so traditional countries that did not meet the 2% mark, including Germany, right? I believe Germany's 2.2 now, that have increased tremendously. And so just from all outward signs that you see that countries like Germany, the Baltic states, I believe, are at 3% of their GDP for NATO, that they're taking this seriously. They take it as the existential threat to Europe. And I have not seen a wavering on that, Michael. I have not seen, okay, a year in, you know, we have bigger fish to fry. Let's move on to the next threat. And so the closer you are to it, so the Romanias, Bulgarias, Poland, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, Finland, right? To it, the more it's of everyday conversation, right? And as you go to the West, it becomes less, but it's still together, right? People still talk about it. And I hope that continues.
And just I have some questions about the questions. Sam, sure. If you're still listening, do you really, are you asking about Australian view of the conflict? I'm not sure how qualified we are to comment on that. But please
Fully
clarify.
support it. Australia.
Yeah, I think they're all on board with it. I haven't seen much daylight on that. But,
They've done individual sanctions, and so is New Zealand. So
yeah, sure. Okay, and then so we covered that. Also, Elizabeth, if you could be a little more specific on what you're asking there in terms of key questions, I'd appreciate it. We'll get back to you on that one. Also, we have been asked about AI. Toby asked, what AI bot are you referring to for predicting the future of social media posts? Are there any line resources that cover this?
So, as my post-retirement job, many of the viewers may not be familiar too much with sort of the ecosystem that is the startup system in Estonia and Eastern Europe, right? And so there's a lot of this, there's a lot of fundamental AI going on, right? And so I would love to be able to sit here and tell you that I'm some expert in AI and artificial intelligence, but I'm not. I go with what these guys are telling me, right? And so if I'm a business advisor to a particular company and they're saying, look, James, this is the future, right? And this is what we're doing to do that. I take their word for it because they have PhD in front of their name. The other thing is a long time ago, I looked at a story and it was a paper written by a professor, and I forgot where, who said that he could predict human behavior to 90 percentile, right? Just based on if he knew your pattern of life, he could predict human behavior, right? So that was actually 14 years ago. And I haven't followed up on that. But if you can imagine what's going on today, then I would say if you combined AI with sort of this traditional research and development into human behavior, that you could probably come up with a pretty good AI bot.
Right. It's that, of course, it's that 10% that might really matter.
Well, it depends. Is it good enough, right?
Yeah.
Is it good enough? And so like, let's, I mentioned ChatGPT, right? And so ChatGPT, their resources only go to 2021, right? And so let's just say, and that's done on purpose just because of the testing nature of it, right? Can you imagine if they had full access to all the information right now? And so that's AI, right? What is it predicting? If it had all these different streams of information, some of which are not available in social media, then what would it be predicting, right? And so that's another interesting thing that will come out in the future.
Right. Okay, so let's ask a bigger sort of what if question here. Do you assess this war will end while Putin is in office? This is a Russia Watcher question, or once he's out of office? Does that, at this point, does it matter?
Well, I mean, it's a great question, right? But so what is the succession plan for Russia? And so you have really hardliners like Patrushev and things like that. And so if they're sort of ceding the Russian government to even more of a hardliner, such as Patrushev or maybe one of the former defense ministers, then it becomes really problematic of like, okay, is this now a Russian pride issue? Or are they gonna like lay off Ukraine? And from the Ukrainian side, I've heard multiple times, it's like, we're going to fight until every Russian soldier is gone from Ukrainian territory. So that's like Crimea as well. And so like, I am not Nostradamus in predicting the future in terms of like, how does this all fall out, right? And then you have funding issues with US Congress, right? Are we going to continue to be able to supply the weapons that they need? And so it's really hard. And so my really non-official prediction will be, it'll be something that nobody thought about that will define how this ends, right?
Right, but it may be too simplistic to just talk about this as Putin's war at this point.
I mean, I think it started that way, right? And if you look
Right.
at the history, and if you look at what Vladimir Putin has been talking about for Ukraine for 20 plus years, it should be no secret that he had intentions on it. But like no one, like including myself, cannot figure out like, how's this going to end? It'll be something nobody thought of.
Cody, let me recast this question a little bit. On the role of commercial satellite imagery, do we have a sense of how much the Russians have been able to take advantage of it?
Well, so correct me if I'm wrong. I think public source Russians also have imagery satellites
Sure.
themselves,
Yeah.
right? But like, so you're referring to like Maxar and people like this.
Right.
Whether they can get an account. Maxar's a U.S. company, right? Whether they can get an account through a third party, right? Because sanctions would be involved there. I'm not disrespecting Maxar. I'm just saying whether the Russians were able to con someone into getting commercial level satellite imagery. I'm not sure that adds to what they're already capable of doing, right? In terms of, they could technically look out the International Space Station and take some pictures, right? They do have their own ability to collect from space.
And Cody and others, you may want to check out our Inside Intelligence that we did last year with Jack O'Connor, who's our colleague here at AAP, who talked a lot about the use of commercial satellite imagery in the Ukraine war. So please check that out on our YouTube site.
And I have to say, as a follow-up, when you mentioned that, Michael, too, that if you're flying a drone or you're doing this on a battlefield, what's the limitation of the drone? So people are going to say it's the battery, right? Because it's like 30-minute battery or whatever. Actually, the limitation is the ability of the operator looking at a tablet or a phone or whatever to pick out interesting objects in there. And so he starts to, have tunnel vision, gets migraine headaches because he can't see this stuff. And so if you look at commercial satellite imagery, right? What's the limitation? The ability to collect it or the ability to analyze it? Constructively analyze it.
Right. Yeah. Well, that's the prior question. It's great to have all this information coming in, but now what? What if you don't have the capacity to deal with it all?
Right.
Michael raises the question about operation security, and this is an important one, I think, because with everybody as a collector, soldiers, everybody, how do for example, the Ukrainians keep operational security to prevent them from being exploited, or are they doing it?
Well, if you look at historically, again, the Ukrainian Special Services were created in 1991. And so they are the daughter service of the former Soviet State Committee on Security, KGB, right? And so you could just go read Sword in the Shield or any other sort of OPSEC related information to see the lengths the Soviets went through to keep information. Like sometimes your boss wouldn't know what you were doing, right? And so I would, without having any inside knowledge, I would fully expect Ukrainians to have carried that knowledge from Soviet times and only enhanced it into their operational security of today, right? And I'm not going to get into the details, but I have full confidence that OPSEC plays a major role in how Ukrainian is using intelligence, implications for counterintelligence, right? Every day you can read something about the SBU capturing Russian spies and things like that. And so that just demonstrates to me that they're actively doing a great job.
Okay, thanks everybody for your great questions. We have several more. We'll try to get to them all. And by the way, this video will be on our YouTube channel, JHUAP YouTube Inside Intelligence in a day or two. So you'll be able to check it out there as well. And Amanda asked about what we're seeing from North Korea, if we have a good sense of this. She mentioned the report of them sending perhaps 100,000 special forces to support Russia in fighting against Ukraine. Do you see any other North Korean involvement in the Ukrainian war?
I'm not really.
This is a true story. That's a lot of troops.
I would just tell anyone to look at the history between, say, a country like North Korea and Russia, or China and Russia, before the bottom falls out and all of a sudden it's a strategic alliance between the Axis, right, and the West. That they have their own domestic and international issues. And so what is the strategic advantage of North Korea sending 150,000 troops, right? I think the blowback would be absolutely tremendous on them. But again, where did the information come from, right? I would love to look at the source of that information and then see, is this an information peddler? Is this fake news? Is this active measures, right? I just, on its surface, there's nothing there to evaluate.
Okay, question on implications. Do we have a sense of what, and this David asked about, what are the probable implications if Ukraine loses? What is losing at this point look like for Ukraine? It doesn't seem like it's that plausible they'll be taken over, but is losing just that they're not able to regain the territory that they lost since last year?
So imagine 4 Transnistrias, right? Transnistria's, for everyone that doesn't know, it's the breakaway republic of Moldova, right? And so this was sort of a ungoverned spot, but when the Soviet Union broke up, it became this sort of independent place, right? And so since 1993, I believe, right, that Russian peacekeepers have been in Transnistria, right? And so can you imagine, let's just say Donetsk, Luhansk, all the way down to Mariupol, things like that. So you have this conflict line, right? And so it's not, it's on one side is Russia, on the other side is Ukraine, and then you have this sort of, you know, demilitarized zone with maybe UN peacekeepers will never be there, but let's just say UN peacekeepers. Like, what is that? Like, that's, to me, that's the most realistic. But I know, look, I've heard both sides of the story. I've heard it from my Ukrainian friends that say that'll never happen. It's going to be pushed all the way. But I fear for the stability of Ukraine as a government if something cannot be resolved to that end.
Right. Question from Serge about what are we using enough of our financial leverage against the Russian oligarchs, particularly Putin himself and his private money? Is there more, do you think, that we can be doing here? Would this, in fact, stop the war if we were able to leverage this problem?
I would say, you know, we in this regard, you need to look at everybody who's we.
Yeah.
So that's not only Department of Treasury, who's implementing things by executive order, or former sanctions that were on Russia since 2014. If you were to read the United Kingdom sanctions or the various EU sanctions that keep getting more severe and more severe, or Australian, right? There's the hook to Australia, or New Zealand. It's aggressive. Is there something we can always be doing more? Absolutely. But what if you were to read these sanctions, and I don't encourage anyone to read them, but if you were, it's a lot of things. It seems like it would be very effective.
Okay, so a question from Richard about OSINT and how do we maintain this balance, right, between openness in the media and the transparency of Western governments, and particularly in a conflict like this, versus the need to have operational security, keeping the media out of restricted operations, things like that. I mean, is this going to be a bigger question as we face the future on this, on how do we maintain this balance?
Yeah, and I would say, think of it this way, right? That what you see on social media, OSINT, is instantaneous or near instantaneous, right? And so just imagine a scenario where somebody is reporting on, let's say, a battle or something in Ukraine, right? And it's obvious maybe the person is there, or they have sources that are there. And then say the US intelligence community is quiet and doesn't respond to anything related to that, and it's significant. So what happens there? I think the media then plays an intermediate role to be like, like we can all see with our 2 eyes what's happening here. And so either intelligence agencies or spokespeople for intelligence agencies can say, yes, we acknowledge that. However, we're still not going to say anything. Or yes, we acknowledge that we're continuously monitoring the situation and agree or disagree with the assessment being made, right? This discussion needs to happen in the future. It does. Or because traditionally, what do intelligence agencies say? No comment, right? Hey, we're not going to get involved in this stuff. So who's speaking for everybody? The TikTok guy, right? Like that's very dangerous. And so there needs to be this new paradigm going forward that protects sources and methods, right? You always want to do that, but at the same time has this dialogue only to strengthen what I was saying earlier, the traditional ints in this OSINT, in the new OSINT. OSINT's been around for 40 years, right? But what we're talking about is what you can see now.
Annie asked about how about intelligence sharing among OSINT analysts in the various countries? I mean, they're all looking at their picture. Do we see something where there'd be more interrelationship between OSINT analysts at the, I guess, at the official level?
I would hope so. I don't have any purview into that, but just me as an American, I would hope so.
There's certainly a lot we can learn from each other on how people can do it in many ways.
And if people are,
right?
sorry, Michael, if people are interested, and I don't endorse Bellingcat, but like some of the things Bellingcat has done, it's just, and they use a lot of OSINT. It's just been, I've never seen the ability to collect OSINT at that level to sort of ferret out Russian spies and do things that they've done. And so even if you take 1/3 of what they were, the capabilities they had, it's a pretty powerful tool.
All right, so a little more questions here. Still trying to go through a few of these here. Thanks for catching up with me on a few clarifications. Well, I mean, what do you think? Is this? I mean, it looks like things are pretty hunkered down. The battle lines seem pretty static right at the moment. What do you see your people's attitude toward the war in the countries that you're following, the media that you're seeing? Do you see a different approach to, say, Ukraine itself than we have in the American media?
Absolutely. So the American media sort of, no disrespect to the American media, but you have a news cycle, that news cycle comes and it goes, right? I think that the saving grace for Ukraine is that it still comes, it's still in the cycle, right? And people still talk about it. But I can speak for, say, Finnish or Latvian or Estonian news, where it's not a cycle, it's like dedicated 1-hour specials to Ukraine almost every morning. You can find it somewhere. And like, I live in Tallinn, right? It's the capital of Estonia. And I live in an area that has sort of the business district. There's about 30 buildings that are colored in the Ukrainian flag. So they're completely unscientific, but no one has changed the colors, right? And then every public building in Estonia has maybe a county flag of one of the counties of Estonia, the Estonian flag, and the Ukrainian flag. Private businesses have the Ukrainian flag, right? And my unscientific poll of, I was there last March, April, the summer, and then now, it has not changed at all. Now, is there some war fatigue? Yeah, possibly, but like, if it's an existential threat to the Baltic states, and so they're not going to just start wavering on
that. We have another question on Ukrainian forces. Have we noticed since this began, it's been a year, what changes we've seen with them? I mean, clearly they've also had to bring in a lot of new troops that have all had to get trained. What can we say we've learned about the Ukrainian forces from this? If you have,
well, so I'm not a military analyst, right? I wouldn't want to speculate with Ukrainian forces. Again, my completely unscientific poll of the soldiers I've spoken to, right, is unwavering, right? Their support to this is unwavering. Their commitment, their energy, their adrenaline is unwavering. I've never seen anything like it. And this isn't just, it's not just like close friends that I have, friends of friends, just a social contact that I've met through somebody. And the message is always the same, right? Which is, this is our homeland. We're going to fight to every Russian soldier is off Ukraine, period, right? There's no negotiation, there's no nothing. And I love that, right? This this ambition, this passion. But people are humans, and can this go on forever?
It would be costly. I mean, in terms of
Well, not to mention expense, right?
right, yeah. It's and that's, I think, something that's going to be debated here, and we'll see what happens with that. I mean, short of a complete collapse of the Russian armed forces, it seems like it would be very costly. Another question is, and maybe you have some feeling of this, of course, millions of refugees from Ukraine have come into Eastern Europe and other places in Europe. What has been, I don't know what the numbers are. I mean, it became 5 million at one point last year when I sort of lost track. But what are we getting a sense of? Are people going back? How have this been accepted by the countries who have been hosting them? So this is a source of tension.
Again, not an intelligence matter, but I do have some visibility. I believe some did go back, especially during the lull, if you want to call a lull in fighting. But I can tell you that the European countries that have accepted these refugees have given them either temporary or permanent work status, schooling for their children, just sort of this unlimited, right? Support and aid while they try to become good members of the society that they've integrated into, right? And so personally in Estonia, people may or may not know 30% of Estonia still speaks Russian. Most Ukrainians speak Russian language. And so there's the ability to sort of assimilate. And I know it's sort of weird because it's the Russian language, but they can assimilate in a place like Estonia very quick. Whereas if you went to, say, Italy or Spain or some other farther away member state, it would take a little longer because you have to learn Spanish or Italian. And so what you see in places like Latvia, Estonia, places that had a minority Russian speakers, that they have a tendency to integrate a little better, quicker. So and the local language, right? I've met, they've learned Estonian, they've learned Latvian, so that's good on them too.
Well, why don't we finish with a little bit of a plug? So what are you doing? What would you, we had, this has been a great discussion on Ukraine and the perspective of intelligence. What you're going to be doing a course for us in the fall, something we're looking forward to. What can you say about now the role of this type of clandestine intelligence, and when we've been talking all about OSINT here, what role do you still see as the type of human operation intelligence playing?
I mean, so there's a reason. Thank you for that setup too, Michael.
Okay.
You talk about the oldest professions of the world. There's a reason that human intelligence, espionage, spying, call it what you will, is one of those, right? What's the old saying, 3 people can keep a secret if 2 are dead, right? There is always a need. It does not matter whether this is the TikTok generation, Gen Z, whatever, there is always a need for human intelligence because people keep secrets they don't want other people to know, right? And if you ever have that dynamic, there are governments out there, there are businesses out there, there are other people out there that need or want the secrets of these other people. It's so difficult in, say, 2023, encrypted apps, all these things, but everyone's leaving a digital footprint out there, right? And so at its core, the fundamental thing, what you were referring to, Michael, is still human, right? It's still human. And there'll be a lot of interesting things that you can learn from just taking a fundamental course without all the bells and whistles of all the other fancy technology. But as a former instructor of mine used to call it, the sort of the sticks and the bricks, right? The fundamentals. It's very fascinating.
Thanks for that, and we look forward to that. We did our best here to get to all your questions in the chat and the Q&A. Thank you for the good ones. To our friend in South Africa, check out the beginning of the video, which will be on our YouTube channel in a day or so, JHUAAP YouTube, on James talking about the implications of this war for global security and what this means, especially Europe and really for the world. So check out that, please. And James, we're really looking forward to carrying on this discussion in the future. Thanks for being with us today. And I thank everybody for joining us. Next month, we will be joined by David Camion, who will be talking to us about AI, chat GPT and intelligence, and what that means, and how do we think this can work for intelligence analysis. So that'll be a great discussion too. For Inside Intelligence, it's Michael Ard. Thank you for being with us. Thanks, James.
Thank you.